Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. This week, I read Becoming Free Indeed, My Story of Disentangling Faith from Fear by Jinger Duggar Vuolo. From Jinger herself, this is how she's had to figure out what she believes and why she believes it. After reading this book, I can say that it's a clear message to those who have left behind Bill Gothard's teachings. Don't turn away from God when you turn away from this particular false prophet. This book was released in early 2023, very recently, under W Publishing Group, which is an imprint of Thomas Nelson. And this is, I believe, the third book that Jinger has been involved in writing. There was one with her sisters, and then the second with her husband. Now, for those who don't know, Jinger Duggar Vuolo is one of 19 Duggar children, and they had various iterations of their show on TLC. The most commonly known one was 19 Kids and Counting, and most recently Counting On, which just stopped airing about 2 years ago now, I think. Now, there's a lot of controversy surrounding the Duggar family, but the reason they became famous is because they had such strict conservative values compared to the rest of the country and perhaps the rest of the world. And they have a strict emphasis on purity and obedience. So that's why they were famous in the first place, in addition to them having 19 children. Now, Jinger's adult life has somewhat strayed from what the family became famous for, and so that's why this book is kind of necessary. And just to give like a little bit of an example, there were quite a few like articles and attention surrounding when Jinger started wearing pants in public for the first time. So that was like an actual like story, but that's just because in her family, the women wear skirts and dresses all of the time, no matter what. So, this book is needed because it's such a different, mindset than what we were originally introduced to this family as. Now, before we get into the book, there is another writer credited here. His name is Corey Williams. And he is someone who, in addition to being a writer, is a student of the Bible. It's not very clear like what exactly his exact role is in this book. I don't know if he's like a ghostwriter or an editor, but from what we can see, he's someone who is kind of helping Jinger write out her thoughts on paper, which is very important. Because in the past, I've said when it comes to these nonfiction books and memoirs written by celebrities and famous figures, sometimes they're not really good writers. And so it's always nice to have someone who knows how to come across correctly on paper that can kind of help you tell your story so that we get as much of the necessary information as possible. This is a reflective narrative. So obviously, this book is about Jinger. She's the main character and she's also the one writing it. So we're getting a lot of information on her past decisions, but also her decisions going forward and kind of the thought process behind that. There are 13 chapters. Each chapter has kind of like subsections within them, and they're titled appropriately. And the next thing I really love about nonfiction books is that with the good ones, there's a lot of references. So with this one, it's a little bit differently because it is a memoir and it's also very religious heavy. The references are slightly different, but in other nonfiction books, I really love to see different quotes from other authors or data or statistics to back up the author's claim. With Jinger, a lot of this came from, obviously, the Bible. And on the publication page, it actually says that unless noted otherwise, anything pulled from the Bible is being pulled from the ESV version. Another important reference here is Bill Gothard. And so we get a lot of information from his mouth specifically by way of speech excerpts, book excerpts, quotes, but also just his general ideology explained. For a lot of people that are not in this world that she's discussing, For one, I didn't really know who this person was, and so it's important to have almost his kind of thought process explained through the public words that he's had over the years so that we can put context to Ginger's reactions to those different policies or theologies and whatnot. And lastly, the most important helpful reference is Ginger's journal notes. So it not only provides background information, but it also explains Ginger's state of mind during that specific moment that she's discussing. So a lot of these notes are coming from periods where she was like a teenager, a youngster, and so we're getting that contrast, which backs the emphasis that she has changed in her religious journey. So that's probably the most important reference here. And one more thing I want to say about writing. I don't read like the most books in the world, but I do read a good amount. And the one thing with these nonfiction books is that I love learning so much about different people and even different historical events, but sometimes the chapters are so disjointed from one another. Not with this book. This book, literally, the last sentence of, like, let's say chapter 1 flows very well into the title of chapter 2, which seems simple and it seems really like minor, but it helps you read through the book a lot easier, and it doesn't really give you a place to stop. It helps you kind of go along, and I guess that kind of makes sense because when we're talking about Ginger's religious journey, it is a chronological path, and so we're starting kind of with her reflections in her childhood and kind of the basis of Bill Gothard and all that, and so we kind of go through it, you know, as the years progress. But I just wanted to mention that I thought that the transitions through between each chapters were very smooth, and it allowed me to read through the book kind of as one full story, as opposed to having these chapters that are each telling their own story. So I just really like that, and I really appreciated that. And I know that's like really like kind of, most people probably don't care about that, but as someone who reads and reviews books, you know, that was nice. So when it comes to this book, I would say probably more than having like themes being discussed, it's important to understand what is established in this book. Again, I am not in this world at all. I've never really heard much about it. Even like I used to watch the Duggars on TV, and like I don't think I fully understood what exactly they were following. So we have to establish a few things. So this is probably going to be the bulk of the episode here. So first of all, Jinger says this a few times throughout the books, but this is her religious journey. These are her convictions. They're not Gothard's, they're not her family's, and they're not her husband's. The reason that statement is so crucial is because, again, coming from this group where women are not necessarily given the freedom to express their own thoughts or opinions or whatever may have you. And so typically anything that's kind of coming out of a woman's mouth in this group, it's probably something being regurgitated from Bill Gothard himself or from the father or from the husband once they get married. And so she has kind of emphasized that these are her words. We get a peek at just how, I want to say sheltered, but that doesn't necessarily seem like the greatest word to describe her younger self, but she describes it as putting on self-protecting performances, which is basically just you acting as you think other people want you to act, or you living your life in a way that will not disrupt the people around you. And what happens is you kind of become a little selfish because you're worried about how well you're performing against these standards that someone else has held for you. And you're protecting yourself against breaking these rules or vows or laws or whatever that Bill Gothard has set up. And what happens is it causes anxiety. So from a very young age, it seems to me that she was dealing with a lot of anxiety because she was so focused on doing the right thing. Because Bill Gothard, what he did is he kind of set it up to say there is a right and a wrong way to live life, period. And it goes down to the like minimal details in life. And if you're not performing this exactly the right way, then bad things are going to happen to you and your family. So this puts a lot of pressure on a young Ginger, and we get to kind of see just how much it affected her. And this self-protecting performance that she talks about followed her into adulthood, and she talked about how difficult it was to kind of like get out of her own head to even connect with other people. Now, Bill Gothard, here's the thing. This is a hot mess. And I may be a little biased because, again, and I'm just going to keep stating this, I don't come from this world. I've never really known anybody that was this conservative, or this, not even conservative, but in this group. This is crazy to me. So there's a few things I want to touch on. First of all, Bill Gothard is someone who at one point, presided over the Institute in Basic Life Principles, or IBLP for short. He's not the head of that group anymore, because I think he had some sexual assault allegations or whatever. So that shows you again the character of this person outside of Ginger's story. But the rise of IBLP came really in the 60s. And what happened is, that was such an uncertain, unstable. That was a time in American history where there was a lot of fear because there was a lot going on. For one thing, there was a lot of kind of the racial tensions were overflowing during that time period. We're talking, this is when a lot of the peaceful protests, Martin Luther King were happening, boycotts, and then civil rights movement, all that stuff was going on. There was also this pushback against a lot of the wars that America had become involved in. And there was like this era evolving of peaceful life and anti-war and all this stuff. There's a lot going on in America. And let me just say, I don't think there's ever really been a time in America where everyone was completely satisfied and content and happy. So it's easy to see how something or someone can come in and sweep people out from under their feet, because fear is just uncertainty. You're scared because you don't know what's going to happen next. So what happens? Someone comes along and provides a so-called certain outcome for you by way of rules. So what Bill Gothard did is he says, okay, look, I have the right way for you to get to heaven, and I know what you need to do to live your life in a way that pleases God. And that's it. And that's how it happened. People were attracted to that. And honestly, you really can't criticize that, because this is still happening today, and it doesn't necessarily have to happen on this scale for people to be moved by it. They want a sure thing. They want to know that they are living their lives the right way. Ultimately, what happens though is that it removes critical thinking from the equation, because if someone's telling you just do this, and this, and you're fine, you're not thinking that what they're saying doesn't make any sense. And then when you have these people that maybe were brought into this when they were young adults, they start having kids, and then their kids have kids, and now you're like 3 generations deep into this, and it's like there's no critical thinking there. So no one's going to question what they have been living their lives like for the past, or for forever. So, and one thing that I love that Ginger touched on is that not only does this remove critical thinking, it removes the love, because it turns it into like a test, like you're following the rules, but you're not really loving God. You're just following the rules that you were told to follow, and that's not really what's supposed to be happening there, and that's not a good relationship that you have with God. Gothard's overall teachings can be summed up by the 7 principles of design. So these kind of areas cover everything in life: your home life, your work life, whatever you do, how you act, period. So the 7 principles are design, authority, responsibility, suffering, ownership, freedom, and success. So every aspect of your life is covered, and that's it. And what happens is, again, this is like the black and white thinking. There's a right and wrong, which honestly, if you look at it from like, I guess, like an academic standpoint, this is effective leadership, because you're telling a group of people that, look, you do this, you're straight, you're good, you're gonna get there. And that's how these things happen. Honestly, throughout history, cults have risen before, and you kind of think, like, looking back on it, you're like, how did people, like, why were they following this person? Because they were scared. They were scared, and what happened is that person took advantage of their fears, whatever it may be, and they weaponized it against them, and they didn't even realize it. So now Gothard also engaged, I guess, in this thing called proof texting, which is basically, you find the idea that you want to promote first, like saying women should only wear skirts or dresses and never wear pants. And then you find various verses in the Bible that support your claim with very loose connections. And that's like, you're like cherry picking. And I just also want to say, there are Christians that do this outside of Gothard's realm, who they have an idea in their head, usually a hateful one, that they want to promote, and they cherry pick different lines. It won't even be a full verse. It'll be different lines of the Bible to back up their claims. That's misleading, it's misguiding, and that's not accurate, because you're not looking at the Bible in context. You're just pulling something out that can benefit you at that moment. Jinger said that Gothard finds truth in analogies and not in the Word of God. So we kind of just would make up these kind of weird analogies and just run with it. And so then it's no longer about what the Bible says. It's about what Gothard said. And what Gothard said is not in the Bible. So this is crazy. And last thing he does is he had these, okay, I'm not really sure how this is pronounced, Remas or Ramas. It's Rhemas, which basically means that he had his own personal interpretations of scriptures, and the people just accept his interpretations, and that's it. So again, when we're talking about critical thinking, what happens is you're listening to what he thinks the verse means, but you're no longer referring to the verse. You're referring to what his thoughts on that verse is. Which all boils down to, Gothard is a false prophet. People who use the word of God to their own advantage. Again, this has happened various times with various different groups and cults. So, this is nothing new. This is just one of many. Okay, so another thing that the book establishes is the idea of deconstruction versus disentanglement. So obviously disentangling is in the title, but deconstruction is this idea that there's adults who grew up Christian, or specifically in Gothard's group, but completely rejected these ideals as adults, and thus they're not even considering themselves Christian anymore. Whereas disentangling, which is how Jinger puts her journey, is that she's rejecting Gothard's teachings, but she still believes in God, and she still considers herself a Christian. Which I also didn't know. This was kind of like a small portion of the book where she discussed how there were various people that she grew up with that not only left Gothard's theology and his teaching, but completely turned away from God because they had found out or realized that Bill Gothard was just not, he wasn't it, basically. So I didn't know that that was such a movement within that group. I'd always assumed that that group was kind of like, once you're in it, you're in it for a few generations, and you marry someone else from that group, and go on, whatever. So okay, second to last thing here, legalism. So this is discouraged by Jinger. I never really understood what legalism is. I thought it had more to do with like legal stuff, law stuff, but basically it's the strict adherence to the principle. Salvation is earned through good works. So where does that good works, where does that lie? In Bill Gothard's teaching. So basically you need to follow my rules and you'll make it to heaven. What this does is it encourages loyalty to man and not true Christianity. And again, it just turns religion into a rule book. It enforces consequences and fear, and it's not really focusing on the true things like, I don't know, the love that God has for all of us, but that's just from someone looking in. And lastly, Jinger touches on Christian liberty, which for her means Christianity without judgment from other Christians. Let me tell you something. Some of the most judgmental people I've ever met call themselves Christians. And so when you couple that with the fact that there can be a lot of infighting, why would you discourage someone else from believing in God because you don't like the things that they wear or do? Or how does that make any sense? But I digress. She continues to say that if something is spiritually unhelpful to you, that doesn't mean the same for others. So, i.e., if somebody decides to wear pants, why would you cut that person off or something? This, it's stupid to me. Of all the things that you can say that somebody's not a Christian for, you're going to say it because they started wearing pants and not skirts? And this isn't in the book. That's just me, again, from the outside looking into this group, it's crazy the things that they kind of not fight about, but the little standards that they hold themselves to. You really think that somebody, if they're a devoted Christian, they do everything right, whatever, and the only thing they don't do is they just don't wear skirts, they wear pants. You think that's really going to stop them from getting into heaven? I'm just saying. This is how much sense this does not make, these rules that he has for people. Okay, there is one theme, and surprisingly, it's about fear. So when we talk fear versus self, again, I think the overall fear here that a lot of people use, and especially false prophets, is the idea of what's going to happen to you after death. So, and that's because they don't know themselves. Who are they to know? They're not going to know what's going to happen to you after death. So basically, they always say, in order to secure a better position after death, you have to do X, Y, and Z. Another kind of side note of this, you can tell I watch TLC a lot because I immediately thought of Sister Wives. I didn't wrap my head around the fact that I guess for that group of people, they practice polygamy because they think that after death that's going to get them into a higher position. I don't know. So anyway, that's another example of somebody telling you need to do X, Y, and Z in order to achieve whatever greater status. These are man-made conditions versus God's actual instructions. And then when we have this whole health and wellness aspect to this, so Bill Gothard would say stuff like bad things are going to happen to you health-wise because you don't believe in God enough. And not just you don't believe in God enough, but you don't follow my rules. You're not following the 7 principles. There was this one story where I don't remember the entire thing. It's in the book. But it was regarding a woman who had lost, I don't know if it was her husband or her sons at sea. And they said that it was due to the fact that she had a painting up of a boat in the sea or something like that. And so they were basically just saying you're inviting bad things in, or basically it's your fault because you hung a painting and then, you lost loved ones. Makes no sense. And it really just puts more pressure on those people because now they're thinking that any little thing that they do will get somebody killed around them. That's crazy. Then we have fear and uncertainty. So this is just a reiteration of what I've been saying for the whole episode, that people or organizations or both will take advantage of your fear in times of unrest. A big example is Jonestown, and the fear there, I think, was that, and if you haven't watched any documentaries on it, I highly recommend it. It's a fascinating case. It's very sad, but the leader kind of provided the solution to a lot of the racial inequality and stuff going on in the country by saying we're building a paradise elsewhere. And he managed to get a lot of people to join this cult, and it ended up with, tragically, a lot of people lost. So, I don't want to make light of any situation. I just want to say that this is not something that's not common. There are various people who have the charisma and the strategy to convince people to act against their own self-interest. So, if anything, this book can be a guiding light for people that are just kind of consumed by their own fear, so that they can kind of manage that so no one else can come in and say, oh, I'll take care of it for you because I got the right answers. That's not realistic, and it's very dangerous. Another practical example, honestly, is just politics and everything. Perfect example, 2020, the pandemic. Every politician is coming up saying, I've got the right answers to end this, blah, blah, blah. This is just, you have to have a hold on your fear, and don't let it get to hysteria, because then you're really vulnerable to all types of manipulation. So in instability, be very careful to trust anyone who says that they have all of the right answers, period. So what do I think about this book? If you haven't guessed by now, I thought it was very insightful. I thought that it was surprisingly objective when acknowledging the hypocrisy with Gothard, but also by Jinger saying, look, I'm still a Christian, I still believe in God, I just don't believe in this man, which that's not like a crazy statement. That's, she believes in God, but this guy was just, this group is crazy, the following that they still have. But, I do think it's universal in terms of your fear versus yourself. I think that outside of religion, you can apply this to your everyday life, that if you allow somebody to give you the right answers, it's probably not a great thing. Ooh, one thing, okay, this is the only side eye I had throughout the whole book, is so Jinger was referencing something, and she wasn't really talking about what this Timothy 2:9, what I'm about to quote, but it caught my eye. You'll see. So Timothy 2:9 says, adorn themselves in respectable apparel, not with braided hair and gold or pearls. So maybe this is just for the Black people out there. So I clearly have braided hair and I wear pearls on special occasions. What does that mean? Are we not supposed to braid our hair and wear pearls? I sounded real country then, but yeah, that was a side eye for me. So I'm just interested to know what that means. I'm not going to stop, I'm going to keep wearing my braids. Nice protective style. But so is this a reread? Of course. I think it's a great reference. I will say though, because there's so much controversy surrounding this family, that if you're someone who does not like the family and you're reading this book to not like them more, I don't think there's a point to read it for you. I really don't. I don't think that's a good use of your time. If you're going into it just really wanting to understand Jinger a little bit more, then this is great. I went into it with that intention. I was actually looking for this book because I hadn't read any of her previous stuff, but I just thought it was interesting, kind of her breaking away, and then also looking at some of the interviews she's done with Tamron Hall and a few other things. So I think that I made good use of my time because I learned, a little bit about her backstory and also Bill Gothard. So I definitely think it's a good book. I think it's a good reference. It's going to be one that I keep on my bookshelf. I won't give this one away. So yeah, but just, because there's a lot of people that understandably they don't really want anything to do with the family for whatever reason. So if that's you, I don't think it would be a good use of your time to read this book, because that makes no sense to read up on somebody that you don't like and you want to not like more. That's just how I feel. But I have a couple takeaways here. So fear can and will be used as a tool to intimidate you against yourself, religious or non-religious. Humans tend to take advantage of each other's weaknesses. So don't let anyone use fear to plan your every move. And lastly, rely on the source. In this case, the Bible. Pastors are people. If you really want the word of God, then read the Bible. That's it. And for anything else non-religious, that goes as well. Don't let somebody tell you what... Oh, that sounds kind of funny because now I'm like, don't let anybody tell you what this book says because I'm doing a book review podcast. But I mean, it's true. Listen, you don't have to take my word for any of it. Just read the book. It's great. But don't let anybody tell you that, hey, look, I'm the expert on this. I'm not the expert on this. Read the book, you know? And if we're talking religion, read the Bible. Don't listen to some man's interpretations and something that he thought of or dreamed of. That doesn't make any sense, especially when you have the source material. Just read that. And that's all. Yeah, that's it. I thought this was very good. I have a lot of various eclectic reads coming up. I have a few fiction pieces, a few more Agatha Christie pieces. I have a few more memoirs as well, and some historical nonfiction books. So this will be a good run this time. So I hope everyone has a good rest of their weekend, and I will see you all next week. Thanks.